An action RPG from Bandai based on a popular comic and cartoon? Well, you know we're in for a real treat here. Saint Seiya, and yes, that's what the kanji spells out, was one of the big three action franchises of the mid-80s in Japan. The other two being Dragon Ball and Fist of the North Star. It was also the only one of those three to be popular internationally in the mid-80s, particularly in Europe and Central and South America. That's why it's one of the few NES games that weren't released in the US but were in Europe. As for what it's about, I'll be upfront here. I have bounced off Saint Seiya pretty hard. I'm not entirely sure it has a coherent plot. There's some martial artists, and they have magical, maybe, armor that they call cloth for some reason. And they protect the goddess Athena, who's around for some reason. And there's some people who want to do vague things for poorly defined reasons. But there's a lot of fights. My rule of thumb is that when an action show goes into a tournament arc is a good point to reassess if you should be watching it. And Saint Seiya starts with a tournament arc. The game replicates the first story arc of the series, but the cartoon adaptation of it was still in the middle of airing when the game was released. So in order to avoid spoilers, they had a contest in Weekly Shonen Jump magazine to have fans design a new end boss for the game. In terms of gameplay, Saint Seiya is a weird mashup. You have these side-scrolling adventure segments where you look around for the next goal, and you have these RPG-style battle segments that are used for all the dramatic fights. Turns out the game does neither of those well. When you start the game, the first thing that you're instructed to do is put in your birthday. Your Zodiaque sign determines your starting stats. This winds up being pretty important since not all stats are created equal. You need to raise all of your stats equally, and it's more difficult to raise your weaker stats. So if your Zodiac sign has weak attack and defense, you are going to have an extremely difficult time of it. There are 4 core stats and 3 extra stats. The core stats are A power for your attack power, M power for your movement power, D power for defense, and H power for heart. H power controls how effective your skills are. The 3 minor stats are AS for attack speed, which isn't actually attack speed, it's how likely you are to hit. CP for cloth power, which determines if you can prevent damage. And JP, which is jump power, it doesn't affect the height of your jump, it affects how likely you are to dodge. Combat is turn-based and you have 4 options: fight, run, talk, and friends. Talking is extremely important, because that's one of the major ways that you recover Cosmo, which is what is used to power your attacks. Calling in an ally switches your main character out for one of your friends. From what I've read, this is always a bad option. So let's fight. When you choose that, the game determines if you or your opponent gets to attack first. When you attack, you have to fill up the bars at the bottom of the screen for each stat. The more points you put in, the more effective they are. And early on, you really want to fill them up all the way. The more points you've applied, the more likely it is that you'll do a special attack. Then you have to choose whether to do a punch or a kick. It's easier to trigger the punch special attacks, so I would stick with punching. Then you take your swing. In the early portions of the game, it's very likely that one hit will be all it takes, especially if you fill up your bars all the way. And since every round is going to cost you at least some Cosmo, the advantages to ending a fight fast are huge. So burn those resources, otherwise you're going to be burning even more. You always have to apply some Cosmo to an attack, otherwise it will have no effect. If the enemy gets to attack, then you choose whether to defend or dodge. Defending always reduces damage, while dodge is a chance of avoiding all damage. After you win a fight, you get some experience, and for about the first dozen fights, every time you win, you have enough to level up. To do that once you're back in the action screen, press select to bring up the menu, and then choose the stats screen. The number to the right of each stat is how much experience it takes to increase it. And as you can see, your weaker stats take a lot more experience to increase. Get all of the primary stats to 4, and all of the secondary stats to 2, and that increases your maximum health by 20. Your maximum health keeps increasing every time you increase all of your primary stats by an additional 2, and all of your secondary stats by an additional 1. Also on this submenu, you can choose to put on or take off your cloth. Wearing your cloth increases your damage and defense, but walking around with it on drains away your Cosmo. You can also choose to move to key locations. You have to use this to get to some quest locations. Or you can get your password. The passwords serve a dual purpose. Not only does it let you continue, but each player supplies their own password in the 2-player mode to have their Seiyas fight. Now I can talk about how terrible the action sequences are. You basically walk around, and at certain points in the story there will be enemies to punch. These guys have a bad tendency to appear on top of you, to automatically drop in, to respawn when you close out the menu, to take off running before you can even attack them, to appear from thin air, and to take a lot of hits to defeat. Seiya's own attacks are pretty short range, so you have to have a good rhythm to be able to take out the enemies without getting hit yourself. During these adventure segments, you go and talk to some people, and they'll increase your Cosmo. You can also get healed. The hospital is the only source of healing in the game, and they'll only heal you after certain fights, and they'll only do it once in those situations. So attempting to grind up some stats is extremely dangerous. When you're defeated, you reappear at the hospital, and you're set back to what your stats were after you defeated the previous major enemy. So if you scrape by with only 1 hit point, you have 1 hit point when you're there. Both Cosmo and health are in short supply in Saint Seiya, which is another reason why taking out enemies in a single attack is vital. It's entirely possible to get stuck with not enough health or Cosmo to continue. In the action segments, watch out for this skull. There's an invisible pit below it, and if you go down the pit you'll have to jump back up, but it's also draining your health continuously while you're down there. So Saint Seiya is a pretty bad game. Both the action and RPG segments are poorly designed. It's another Bandai game that solely exists for the name. But it was a very popular name, and for that reason the game did get a sequel on the Famicom. Even more strange, both games got remade in a single package on the WonderSwan. All I can say about that one is that I hope they made some improvements.